This is a summary of a 2022 published article of mine entitled The Educational Philosophy of the Spanish Philosopher Leonardo Polo: Implications for Teachers' Self-Reflection and Classroom Management. The Spanish philosopher Leonardo Polo engaged with both classical and medieval thinkers such as Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, and William of Ockham, as well as modern and contemporary philosophers such as Descartes, Kant, Hegel, Husserl, Heidegger, and Nietzsche. In dialogue with the great thinkers of the history of philosophy, Polo sought to further the achievements of traditional philosophy as well as rectify and correct the project of modern philosophy. From an anthropological and ethical perspective, the Spanish philosopher Leonardo Polo always defended the thesis that the task of the teacher is the activity that is most directly involved with the human being. In this vision, the classroom is perceived as an exceptional space in which one can grow into a better human person. Quite fundamental to the educational philosophy of Leonardo Polo is the radical place and role of the family in the education of the children. The faithful love between the father and the mother of the child is crucial. Once this is broken, the effective education of the child gets broken. Normalcy in the effectivity of the daughter or son is of primary importance. If it is lacking, then there shall be an absence of the foundation upon which to build the education of the intellect and the education of the will, the two faculties of the human soul. In any case, whether or not this effective education in the family has been solidified, the teacher takes over the education of the child in school. The posterior task of the teacher is a formation in good habits or virtues. Education ought to help the learner develop himself and develop all of his potential with a view ultimately to giving of himself in love and service. The educational task requires that teachers fall in love with their mission and that they be firmly convinced of the transcendence of their role. Thus, what is required of the teacher is not only expertise in his or her respective subject matter, but above all, that he or she be formed in such a way as to discover and value the potentialities and capabilities in each student in order to enable their personal growth. In this view, the student is thus taught to project such potentials into the future so that he or she is enabled to discern the transcendence of every action and conduct. For this, research into future consciousness is called for. Future consciousness is multidimensional and involves all the major capacities of the human mind. A set of different forms of future consciousness has evolved over time, encompassing practical and social intelligence, mythic narrative, rationality and emotionality, science fiction, and future studies. Psychologically, future consciousness involves human emotion and motivation, learning and memory, all major forms of cognition, and self identity. Psychological processes that contribute to expansive, optimistic, and creative future consciousness can be effectively taught. The development of virtues necessary for enhanced future consciousness can be facilitated through future focused, self narrative activities. This educational philosophy views the educational task as a simultaneous learning on the part of both teacher and student to grow into better human beings, with special emphasis on interior growth. Polo views education primarily as learning, departing from his notion of the child in the family as child first of all. This learning makes the child acquire self awareness over time. This view, that the child is primarily a child, enables him to be cordial, understanding, and capable of keeping in mind the interests of others. Polo identifies the source of this ability in classic humanitas, followed immediately by Christianitas. The Latin word humanitas corresponded to the Greek concepts of philanthropia, loving what makes us human, and paideia, education, which were amalgamated with a series of qualities that made up the traditional unwritten Roman code of conduct, mos maiorum. Both humanitas and Christianitas will have to be the object of the education of our times. According to Polo, it would be good to introduce them little by little to rational elements so that the kids learn to exercise their will and not simply be led by egocentric impulses. Ethics then comes to the aid of the educator in the task of ensuring that everybody, teacher and learner alike, grows. Ethics in the philosophy of Polo substitutes neither the economy nor medicine nor any other thing. But without ethics, it is impossible to aspire to make all this consistent. Man is an ethical being because he is free. Ethics is the manner by which to reinforce the maximality of human tendencies. To be ethical is to be more, understood as more human, that is, greater human flourishing. From here, one deduces many implications for the teacher. The Paulian view is that there is no limit to interior growth. Thus, the good use of time by the teacher is of utmost importance for human life. In one of his chief works on education, Ayudar a Crecer, that is, helping others to grow, Paulo insists on the need for educating the imagination, but above all, education of the imagination for the education of the intelligence. Paulo asserts that the education of the imagination is one of the most basic keys to intellectual learning. If not for his imagination, man cannot create. He would not be able to produce, since everything artificial requires imagination. The education of the imagination begins with the eidetic imagination. Eidetic meaning relating to or denoting mental images, having unusual vividness and detail, as if actually visible, which is a type of imagination that is disorganized, quite close to perception. But since it is not exactly perception, it is quite capricious. Its images are not organized in a fixed or stable manner. Almost all persons are able to develop the imagination to the level of proportion, which is an ability that includes association. The proportional imagination is able to identify the whole on the basis only of a part. The associative imagination permits comparing objects. Beyond proportional imagination, there is the representative imagination, where one is able to objectify isochronic time and isomorphic space. Space and time are imagined equal and infinite. Polo has always insisted on this development of the imagination because if it is unable to reach its maximum, then the intelligence is unable to function well. Note that the intelligence depends on what the imagination provides it for the sake of abstraction. The intellect begins to abstract on the basis of images. When the child is unable to transcend disorganized imaginings, as for example because of too much television, then the intelligence gets malformed. An important task for the teacher is the formation in good habits or virtues. Since nowadays education for kids begins at a very early age, teachers have had to introduce games into the school curriculum. 3 or 4-year-olds are taught, for example, to set build up pieces, puzzles, castles, Lego pieces, etc., to resolve geometric problems, as if these were play. These, however, clearly represent formation of the intelligence, of their constructive imagination, but not of their affectivity. That is, what is being trained is their irascible appetite, the passion for winning, which means to say education in fortitude. Winning, keeping in mind that one cannot play outside of the rules, already implies an initiation into ethics. The same happens in losing. A kid who loses and is not used to it does not learn how to play. The same thing happens in two adults when they have never learned to play as they ought. When they lose, they are unable to accept it. In short, they don't learn to win or to lose. Kids' games ought to be such that they can win or lose. They cannot be too difficult that they are unable to win. Paulo said, I remember playing chess with my dad when I was 6 or 7. He allowed me to win without me noticing it. He wasn't playing with me just so I'd win every time, but rather so that I'd exert effort and thus put up some resistance so I don't obtain victories so easily. Games or play in education is quite interesting. I think that the primary function of games is to educate the irascible appetite, teaching kids to win and teaching them to lose. He who wins and loses is able to take risks and failures. That child is a strong person. A strong man is he who has had his affectivity and emotions well trained. Learning the sentiments of hope and of fear is at a higher level. Another implication the article draws is the need for teachers' self reflection. Technologies of the self include systematic techniques of self reflection and regulation of emotions and behavior. Technologies of the self allow individuals to perceive reality adequately, to act appropriately, and to recognize and influence their own negative emotions. Technologies of the self can be seen as strategies and techniques that allow a person to establish a dialogue with himself or herself, which includes a critical discussion of one's own relevant cognitive representations. The core argument about the use of technology of the self in the teaching profession can be found in research on stress and strain. In particular, burnout, depression, and psychosomatic diseases are the main causes of premature retirement in the teaching profession. In this research context, the urgency for teachers to become familiar with techniques that allow them to identify and reduce stressors has repeatedly been emphasized. The last implication that the article draws is character education. Down through history, in countries all over the world, education has had two great goals: to help young people become smart and to help them become good. Good character is not formed automatically. It is developed over time through a sustained process of teaching, example, learning, and practice. It is developed through character education. The intentional teaching of good character is particularly important in today's society since our youth face many opportunities and dangers unknown to earlier generations. They are bombarded with many more negative influences through the media and other external sources prevalent in today's culture. At the same time, there are many more day-to-day pressures impinging on the time that parents and children have together. Thomas Licona, world-renowned character educator, said, a comprehensive model of classroom character education is described in terms of 9 components: the teacher as caregiver, model, and mentor, creating a caring classroom environment, moral discipline, creating a democratic classroom environment, teaching values through the curriculum, cooperative learning, the conscience of the craft, ethical reflection, and teaching conflict resolution. The last implication that the article draws is character education. Down through history, in countries all over the world, education has had two great goals: to help young people become smart and to help them become good. Good character is not formed automatically. It is developed over time through a sustained process of teaching, example, learning, and practice. It is developed through character education. The intentional teaching of good character is particularly important in today's society since our youth face many opportunities and dangers unknown to earlier generations. They are bombarded with many more negative influences through the media and other external sources prevalent in today's culture. At the same time, there are many more day-to-day pressures impinging on the time that parents and children have together. Thomas Licona, world-renowned character educator, said, "A comprehensive model of classroom character education is described in terms of 9 components: the teacher as caregiver, model, and mentor, creating a caring classroom environment, moral discipline, creating a democratic classroom environment, teaching values through the curriculum, cooperative learning, the conscience of the craft, ethical reflection, and teaching conflict resolution." All told, when one goes through the educational philosophy of Leonardo Polo, one cannot but be challenged by the ideas of 1. Lifelong learning, especially in growth in character and virtues; 2. Self-reflection; 3. Strategic design of games for pupils; 4. Future consciousness; and 5. Character/moral education. Thank you.